The habit that steals your respect is not weakness in the way most people imagine it. It is not being emotional. It is not making mistakes. It is not failing once, or doubting yourself sometimes, or having a soft heart in a hard world. The habit that steals your respect is this: constantly abandoning yourself to be accepted. And most people do it so often, so quietly, and so automatically that they no longer even notice. They explain too much. They apologize too quickly. They soften every opinion. They ask for permission to exist as they are. And then one day they wonder why nobody listens to them with weight, why their presence feels easy to dismiss, why their kindness is treated like weakness instead of strength. The painful truth is that respect begins disappearing the moment you start teaching the world that your value depends on how comfortably others receive you. That is why this habit is so dangerous. It does not look dramatic. It does not announce itself like anger, pride, or arrogance. It hides inside your normal conversations. It hides in the extra sentence you did not need to say. In the nervous smile after you spoke the truth. In the urge to justify every boundary so nobody thinks badly of you. In the fear of being misunderstood. In the reflex to make yourself smaller so nobody feels challenged by your presence. And because it looks polite, because it looks peaceful, because it looks socially intelligent, people defend it. But there is a difference between being wise and being self-erasing. There is a difference between humility and self-betrayal. Stoic wisdom never asked you to become invisible. It asked you to become governed. Calm, yes. Grounded, yes. But never empty. Never so dependent on approval that you hand your dignity to every passing opinion. A lot of people think respect is something you can demand with the right tone, the right words, the right image. But respect is felt before it is spoken. It is felt in the way you carry your decisions. In the way you remain steady without needing to perform certainty. In the way you stop negotiating your worth every time someone disapproves. Marcus Aurelius wrote constantly about ruling the inner self because he understood something most people only learn after years of disappointment. If your mind belongs to the crowd, your peace will belong to the crowd too. And once your peace belongs to the crowd, your posture changes, your words change, your energy changes. You become easy to influence, easy to test, easy to move off center. People may still like you. They may still use polite words with you. They may even keep you close. But deep respect begins to disappear when they sense that you do not stand with yourself unless everyone else stands with you first. This is where the deeper wound begins. Because many people are not chasing approval out of vanity. They are chasing safety. They learn somewhere along the way that being agreeable protects them. That being endlessly available makes them valuable. That over-explaining makes conflict less likely. That if they can just be understood perfectly, liked consistently, and judged gently, then they will finally relax. But life does not reward that strategy with peace. It rewards it with exhaustion. Because the person who lives trying to control other people's reactions will never rest. There will always be another face to read, another mood to manage, another silence to decode, another misunderstanding to fix. You end up carrying emotional labor that was never yours. And the cruel part is that the more desperately you try to manage how others see you, the less solid you feel inside yourself. That is why Epictetus kept returning to one simple distinction: what is in your control and what is not. It sounds simple until it touches the ego. Because most suffering begins when you try to control what was never yours to control. You can control your conduct. You can control your words. You can control your discipline, your reactions, your honesty, your restraint. But you cannot control whether someone appreciates you correctly. You cannot control whether someone projects their insecurity onto you. You cannot control whether your silence is called pride, or your confidence is called distance, or your boundary is called selfishness. Once you truly understand that, something inside you starts becoming quieter. Not colder. Not harder. Just quieter. Because you stop wasting life begging for clean interpretations from people who are committed to seeing through the lens of their own limitations. And this is the irony that hurts. The more you chase respect, the more you often lose it. Not because wanting respect is wrong, but because desperation always leaks. It leaks through the eyes, through the voice, through the need to be constantly understood. A person who needs everyone to approve of them cannot stand firmly. They wobble. They adjust themselves every minute. They say yes when they mean no. They speak half-truths to avoid discomfort. They pretend not to notice disrespect because they are afraid of being disliked if they respond. Over time, this creates a silent message. It tells the world, you can press here. You can test this boundary. You can ignore this feeling. You can take more than I want to give, because I am more afraid of losing your approval than losing myself. And once that message is repeated enough, disrespect does not arrive all at once. It settles in slowly, like dust. The Stoics were not teaching emotional numbness. They were teaching inner authority. That is very different. Inner authority means you do not need to turn every reaction into a defense. You do not need to announce your worth every day. You do not need to win every argument. You do not need to explain every choice to people who are not responsible for your life. There is enormous strength in the person who can say less, mean it fully, and remain at peace even when they are not immediately validated. Seneca warned often about becoming too dependent on the noise of the crowd, because once praise becomes your fuel, criticism becomes your poison. And that is how people lose themselves. Not through one catastrophic event, but through daily dependence on external confirmation. If this reflection is meeting you at the right moment, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Sometimes one quiet truth can change the way a person carries themselves for the rest of their life, and that matters more than most people realize. The habit that steals your respect also steals your clarity. Because when you are constantly focused on managing perception, you lose contact with principle. Instead of asking, is this right? You start asking, will this upset someone? Instead of asking, does this align with my values? You start asking, how can I say this in a way that makes everyone comfortable? And little by little, your life stops being built around truth and starts being built around reaction. That is not peace. That is dependence dressed as politeness. Real calm is not the absence of tension. Real calm is the refusal to betray yourself just to avoid tension. There are people who have been respectful to everyone except themselves. They speak gently to others and violently to their own spirit. They give patience to everyone else and deny it to themselves. They honor everyone else's preferences and dismiss their own inner warnings. Then they ask why resentment keeps growing inside them. But resentment is often what happens when the soul has been ignored too long. It is the emotional cost of chronic self-abandonment. You say yes too many times when your truth is no. You laugh at what wounded you. You tolerate what drains you. You remain available where you are not valued. And then, because the pain is uncomfortable, you call yourself too sensitive. But maybe you are not too sensitive. Maybe you are finally feeling the weight of how long you have been betraying your own center. This is why stopping the habit is not about becoming rude. It is not about becoming cold, harsh, unreachable, or proud. It is about becoming aligned. A person with self-respect does not need to humiliate others. They do not need to dominate rooms. They do not need to create fear to feel significant. They simply stop offering themselves in a broken way. They stop over-explaining simple decisions. They stop apologizing for clear boundaries. They stop chasing people who only value what they have to earn. They stop trying to force mutuality where only convenience exists. They stop treating their peace like a price they must pay to stay connected. And this is difficult, because when you stop performing for approval, some people will become uncomfortable. Not because you became cruel, but because they had grown used to easy access to your energy. They had grown used to you bending first. They had grown used to you making things convenient for them, even when it cost you something. The moment you become more centered, more measured, more honest, some people will call it change. Some will call it attitude. Some will say you are distant. But not every distance is a loss. Sometimes distance is the space required for dignity to breathe again. One of the deepest forms of maturity is learning that being misunderstood is sometimes part of living truthfully. Not everyone will interpret your restraint correctly. Not everyone will admire your boundaries. Not everyone will applaud the quieter version of you who no longer feels the need to explain every choice. But the Stoic path was never about applause. It was about freedom. Freedom from emotional slavery. Freedom from impulsive reactions. Freedom from the exhausting need to be approved of by minds that are also confused, wounded, inconsistent, and easily influenced. So when you feel the old habit returning, pause. Notice the urge to explain yourself to people who have not earned that access. Notice the urge to correct every false impression. Notice the urge to make yourself easier to digest so others can remain comfortable. And ask yourself one question: am I speaking from truth, or am I speaking from fear? That question alone can change a life. Because the moment you catch the fear beneath the habit, you stop calling it personality. You stop calling it kindness. You stop calling it just how I am. You begin seeing it clearly for what it is, a learned survival pattern that once protected you, but now weakens your presence. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin realizing how much unnecessary suffering came from trying to avoid discomfort. How many words you spent trying to manage what was never yours. How much energy you gave to preserving connections that were only alive because you kept shrinking to maintain them. That realization can hurt. But it is a clean pain. It is the pain of waking up. And waking up always hurts less than living asleep inside a version of yourself that keeps asking for permission to exist. Part of becoming stronger is becoming simpler. Not simpler in thought, but simpler in posture. Clear yes. Clear no. Calm tone. Honest boundary. Less explaining. Less chasing. Less emotional leakage. More stillness. More discernment. More respect for your own mind. The world does not always respond immediately to that change. Sometimes it resists it first. But your inner life responds almost at once. You breathe differently. You think more clearly. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop trying to predict everybody's reaction. You stop needing universal agreement to feel settled. That is where dignity begins returning. And once dignity returns, something else returns with it, peace that does not beg. If even one line in this reflection touched something real in you, write one word in the comments that describes what you felt while listening. Sometimes a single honest word reveals more than a long explanation ever could. What makes this habit so destructive is that it rarely feels wrong in the moment. It feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like emotional intelligence. You tell yourself you are keeping the peace. You tell yourself you are being patient. You tell yourself you are avoiding unnecessary conflict. But there is a quiet line between peace and self-erasure, and many people cross that line without noticing. They become so committed to being reasonable, so committed to being easy to deal with, so committed to being liked, that they slowly lose the ability to stand still inside their own convictions. And when that happens, the problem is no longer how others see you. The problem is that you have started seeing yourself through the eyes of other people. That is where inner instability begins. Because once your identity starts depending on how you are received, your emotional life becomes fragile. One cold response can shake you. One disagreement can follow you all day. One moment of being ignored can make you question your value. And this is not because you are weak by nature. It is because your center has been placed outside of you. The Stoics understood that a person becomes powerful the moment they stop outsourcing their peace. Not because they stop caring, but because they finally understand that caring without self-possession becomes suffering. A person who belongs to every reaction around them will never truly belong to themselves. Think about how much of modern life is built on reaction. People react to comments, to silence, to tone, to being seen, to not being seen, to approval, to rejection, to every tiny signal that seems to confirm or threaten their worth. And because of that, many people live in a constant state of emotional negotiation. They are always adjusting, always monitoring, always translating themselves, always trying to stay one step ahead of judgment. That is exhausting. But even more than exhausting, it is undignified. Not because your feelings do not matter. They do. But because a life spent constantly reacting is a life spent under control. And one of the most dangerous forms of control is the kind you do not even recognize because it looks like normal social behavior. This is why discipline matters so much. Not just physical discipline. Not just waking up early or following routines. Inner discipline. The discipline to stop filling every silence with explanations. The discipline to let people misunderstand you without chasing them for correction. The discipline to hold a boundary even when guilt tries to weaken it. The discipline to remain calm when another person is clearly trying to test your emotional balance. That kind of discipline is not loud, but it changes everything. Because every time you resist the urge to abandon yourself for approval, you send a new message to your own mind. I do not disappear just because someone is uncomfortable with me. And that message matters more than most people realize. Because self-respect is not built in grand moments. It is built in tiny moments that look almost invisible from the outside. It is built when you do not send the extra message just to keep someone warm. It is built when you stop explaining a decision that was already clear. It is built when you notice the urge to earn back someone's good opinion and choose stillness instead. It is built when you feel the fear of being seen as difficult, selfish, distant, or cold, and yet you remain loyal to what is true. Little by little, these moments create a different kind of person. Not harder, not meaner, just more whole. Seneca often pointed toward the danger of being too available to the moods of the world. He knew that the mind becomes unstable when it is constantly opened to every outside disturbance. And that is exactly what happens when you live without strong interior boundaries. Every opinion enters. Every criticism echoes. Every rejection expands. Every awkward moment grows larger than it should. But when you begin to govern yourself differently, something changes. Other people can still speak. They can still approve, disapprove, misunderstand, admire, ignore, project, invite, withdraw. But they no longer have unrestricted access to your inner weather. That is freedom. Maybe not the dramatic kind people celebrate, but the deeper kind. The kind that lets you sleep. The kind that lets you speak simply. The kind that lets you walk away without carrying invisible chains in your mind. A lot of people are afraid that if they stop overgiving, over-explaining, and over-adjusting, they will become less lovable. But often the opposite is true. What disappears is not love. What disappears is access without responsibility. What disappears is convenience disguised as connection. What disappears is the false closeness built on your willingness to ignore yourself. And yes, that loss can feel painful. Because sometimes the people who were comfortable with the old version of you will not celebrate the stronger version. They may resist it. They may call it ego. They may call it pride. They may act confused by the change, even when the change is simply that you are no longer volunteering your dignity for the sake of emotional comfort. That moment reveals a lot. It reveals who valued your presence and who valued your compliance. It reveals who respected your spirit and who only enjoyed your softness when it came without structure. It reveals who could meet you in truth and who only preferred you when you made yourself endlessly flexible. These are painful realizations, but they are clean. They remove illusion. And illusion is expensive. It costs peace, years, self-trust, and energy. Sometimes losing illusion is the beginning of getting your life back. If this is speaking directly to something you have lived, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Some truths do not feel comfortable at first, but they can save you from years of repeating the same inner mistake. One of the clearest signs that this habit has taken hold of you is how often you feel responsible for other people's emotional experience of your truth. That is where many people get trapped. They believe honesty must always be soft enough, delayed enough, polished enough, and acceptable enough that nobody else feels discomfort. But truth does not always arrive gently. Sometimes truth disappoints people. Sometimes truth creates distance. Sometimes truth forces a relationship to show what it really is. That does not make truth wrong. It makes truth costly. And mature people eventually learn that the cost of truth is still cheaper than the cost of living falsely for too long. Epictetus would say that if you are disturbed, it is not always the event itself, but the judgment you have attached to it. That matters here. Because many people are not actually afraid of conflict. They are afraid of what conflict seems to mean. If someone is upset, they assume they did something bad. If someone pulls away, they assume they were too much. If someone misreads their intention, they assume they must correct it immediately or lose something valuable. But all of that is interpretation. And interpretation, when driven by insecurity, becomes a prison. You begin responding not to reality, but to imagined consequences. You begin shrinking not because truth requires it, but because fear suggests disaster where there may only be temporary discomfort. This is why the work is internal before it is external. You cannot simply decide to speak more firmly if, inside, you still believe that disapproval means danger. You cannot hold a clean boundary if your nervous system still confuses distance with abandonment. You cannot live with self-respect if your deepest instinct is still to survive through pleasing. That is why so many people try to change behavior without understanding the wound beneath it. They focus on posture, tone, communication, confidence, image. But beneath all of that is a quieter question. Do you believe you are still worthy when someone is disappointed in you? That question changes everything. Because once you begin answering yes, a new life starts. Slowly, but unmistakably. You stop panicking every time someone goes cold. You stop turning every disagreement into a crisis of identity. You stop performing emotional labor for people who refuse to carry their own. You begin seeing that many of the situations that once consumed you were never asking for more explanation. They were asking for more self-respect, more steadiness, more willingness to tolerate temporary discomfort without collapsing into self-betrayal. And this does not make you less compassionate. In fact, it often makes you more compassionate, because now your kindness is cleaner. It is no longer soaked in fear. It is no longer an attempt to buy safety. It is no longer a hidden negotiation. It becomes honest, measured, grounded. You help because you choose to help, not because you are terrified of being seen differently. You listen because you value listening, not because silence makes you anxious. You stay when it is right to stay, and you leave when staying would cost your soul too much. That is not selfishness. That is moral clarity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself again and again that other people act according to what seems right to them, even when they are wrong. That thought can free you. Because it reminds you that not every disrespectful act is a final statement about your value. Sometimes it is simply a display of another person's confusion, impulses, wounds, immaturity, or lack of discipline. But if you have the habit of self-abandonment, you will interpret every poor treatment as a signal to try harder, explain more, prove more, bend more. And that is how people stay trapped in cycles that should have ended long ago. They keep offering more goodness to situations that are actually asking for more discernment. Discernment is one of the great forms of self-respect. It means you stop confusing availability with virtue. You stop confusing endless patience with wisdom. You stop confusing tolerance with strength. There are things you can forgive without continuing to participate in them. There are people you can understand without giving them ongoing access to you. There are situations that deserve calm, but not closeness. And when you finally understand that, your life becomes cleaner. Not easier in every way, but cleaner. Less tangled. Less heavy. Less full of emotional debts you never should have taken on. The person who is constantly trying to be respected often focuses on appearance. How to sound stronger, how to seem more confident, how to make others take them seriously. But the deeper transformation is quieter. It is becoming someone who no longer negotiates their own worth in private. Because that private negotiation is the real theft. That is what drains your voice before you even speak. That is what makes your body tense before a simple conversation. That is what makes you rehearse, doubt, adjust, and retreat. Long before someone else disrespects you, that inner negotiation has already weakened your stance. So the work now is to notice it in real time. Notice when your mind begins preparing explanations nobody asked for. Notice when guilt rises simply because you chose yourself. Notice when someone's disappointment instantly makes you feel like the villain. Notice when your first instinct is to soothe their reaction instead of honoring your truth. These are sacred moments of awareness. Because that is the doorway. Not perfection. Awareness. The ability to see the habit before it speaks through you. And once you can see it, you can interrupt it. You can breathe before replying. You can choose one honest sentence instead of 7 defensive ones. You can let silence do what panic usually tries to do. You can allow another person to have their reaction without making their reaction your duty. You can stop treating every moment of tension like an emergency. You can begin proving to yourself, in real life, that discomfort does not destroy you. That being misunderstood does not erase you. That someone else's mood does not define you. That is how respect begins returning, not first from the world, but from within. And the strange thing is, once that inner respect returns, the world often changes too. Not because everyone suddenly becomes fair, but because you stop inviting what once fed on your uncertainty. Your energy becomes more difficult to manipulate. Your silence becomes less apologetic. Your words become cleaner. Your boundaries become more believable because they are no longer spoken with fear underneath them. People sense when a person has stopped bargaining with themselves. It changes the entire atmosphere around them. If one part of this reflection stayed with you, write in the comments, I stop abandoning myself. Not for performance. Not for anyone else. Just as a quiet decision between you and the person you are becoming. There comes a moment in a person's life when the exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore. Not the exhaustion of work. Not the exhaustion of routine. The deeper exhaustion. The kind that comes from constantly adjusting yourself so others can remain comfortable. The kind that comes from swallowing what you feel, editing what you think, shrinking what you know, and betraying what you sense just to keep peace that never truly becomes peace. And when that moment arrives, something honest begins to rise inside you. A quiet refusal. A calm decision. A recognition that you cannot keep asking the world to respect someone you keep abandoning in private. That is the turning point. Not when other people finally understand you. Not when everyone suddenly treats you better. Not when life becomes fair. The turning point comes when you stop participating in your own diminishment. When you stop helping disrespect enter by making yourself negotiable. When you stop acting as if your worth becomes uncertain the moment somebody disapproves of you. This is where stoic strength becomes real. Not as a quote. Not as an idea. But as a way of standing inside your own mind without panic. Because the truth is, many people are not disrespected only because of what others do. They are disrespected because, on some level, they have accepted a life where their own truth is always the first thing sacrificed. They have trained themselves to tolerate inner contradiction. They say one thing and feel another. They agree outwardly while shrinking inwardly. They smile while resentment grows. They stay soft in a way that is no longer kindness, only fear. And over time, that internal contradiction becomes visible. Even if nobody can explain it clearly, people can feel it. They can feel when a person is not fully standing behind their own existence. That is why self-respect is not a performance. It is coherence. It is when your inner life and your outer life begin telling the same truth. When your no starts meaning no. When your yes stops being borrowed. When your silence is no longer fear, but choice. When your kindness no longer asks to be rewarded. When your boundaries no longer come with long apologies attached to them. When your calm is not submission, but control. This kind of coherence creates a peace that is far more powerful than approval. Because approval is unstable. One mood can take it away. One misunderstanding can weaken it. One shift in circumstance can expose how little it was ever worth. But inner coherence stays. It stays when praise leaves. It stays when others become distant. It stays when the crowd misunderstands. It stays because it was never built on their permission in the first place. And that is one of the deepest lessons in Stoic thought. Your life becomes lighter the moment you stop trying to rule what was never yours. Other people's reactions were never yours. Their projections were never yours. Their incomplete understanding of you was never yours. Their comfort with your truth was never yours. What was yours was your conduct, your discipline, your speech, your restraint, your mind, your posture, your principles. And if you can return to those things again and again, you begin to recover something modern life keeps stealing from people, an inner seat of authority. A person with inner authority does not rush to defend themselves in every room. They do not spend all day correcting every false impression. They do not collapse because someone withdrew warmth. They do not become cruel just because they have learned to become clear. They simply stop offering their nervous system to every passing opinion. They begin to understand that not every reaction deserves a response, not every misunderstanding deserves a correction, and not every relationship deserves continued access. That understanding is not bitterness. It is discernment with peace inside it. And maybe that is what has been missing for so many people. Not more confidence in the loud sense. Not more force. Not more image. But more peace-backed discernment. The ability to see clearly without becoming hard. The ability to withdraw without becoming cold. The ability to say no without becoming guilty. The ability to be kind without becoming available for misuse. That balance is rare. But it is exactly what makes a person feel solid. A lot of suffering begins when you mistake self-sacrifice for virtue. You think enduring more than you should makes you noble. You think understanding everyone except yourself makes you mature. You think always taking the high road means always remaining accessible, always staying soft, always giving more chances, always explaining one more time. But wisdom is not endless emotional availability. Wisdom is knowing where goodness ends and self-betrayal begins. Wisdom is knowing that peace is not preserved by constant concession. Peace is preserved by alignment. And alignment changes the way you move through the world. You begin to pause before speaking. You begin to check whether your words are true, not merely acceptable. You begin to notice how often fear used to disguise itself as politeness. You begin to see that many of your old habits were not signs of love, but signs of anxiety. You begin to understand that a calm life is not built by keeping everyone pleased. It is built by becoming internally governed. That is why Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the inner citadel, the place inside a person that cannot be touched unless that person opens the gate. Most people live with the gate open all day. Every opinion walks in. Every look enters. Every bit of tension becomes personal. Every disagreement becomes emotional weather. And then they wonder why they feel so scattered, so fragile, so mentally tired. But the mind was never meant to live like a public hallway. It was meant to have structure, standards, order, a doorkeeper. The habit that robs your respect is, in many ways, the habit of leaving the door open to everything. Every expectation, every guilt, every projection, every invitation to shrink, every pressure to explain, every temptation to trade truth for approval. So the work now is not dramatic. It is sacred, but simple. Close the door more often. Not in resentment. Not in ego. Not in punishment. In wisdom. Let fewer things enter your spirit. Let fewer opinions sit at your table. Let fewer people define the emotional terms of your own life. Protect your interior world not because you think you are better than others, but because you finally understand what happens when you do not protect it at all. Confusion enters. Fear enters. Emotional dependence enters. And once these become normal, your respect dissolves from the inside long before anyone says a word to you. If this reflection has been walking with you in a real way, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Sometimes the right message does not just comfort you, it corrects you. And that kind of correction can change the direction of a life. There is also another truth here, one that many people avoid because it is painful. When you stop abandoning yourself, you may have to grieve the version of you that survived through pleasing. You may have to grieve the years spent chasing understanding from people who were never capable of giving it. You may have to grieve the energy you poured into being digestible, lovable, acceptable, harmless, and endlessly available. That grief is real, because you are not only changing behavior, you are releasing an old strategy. A strategy that may have once protected you. A strategy that may have once helped you belong. A strategy that may have once felt necessary. So be honest about that. Do not shame yourself for having lived that way. Most people learned it for a reason. They learned that peace came through compliance. They learned that affection came through self-editing. They learned that safety came through emotional invisibility. The problem is not that you learned it. The problem is if you keep worshipping it after you realize what it costs. And what it costs is too much. It costs spontaneity. It costs clarity. It costs clean relationships. It costs the ability to rest inside yourself. It costs the feeling of speaking and knowing your own words belong to you. It costs the deep calm that only comes when your soul knows you will not be the first one to betray it anymore. That last part matters more than almost anything. Because real peace does not come from knowing life will always be gentle with you. Real peace comes from knowing that even when life is difficult, even when people misread you, even when relationships shift, even when some doors close, you will remain loyal to what is true inside you. That loyalty becomes shelter. It becomes steadiness. It becomes the quiet foundation beneath your voice, your decisions, your silence, your presence. And that is when something beautiful begins to happen. You stop trying so hard to be respected, and you start becoming the kind of person who naturally carries respect. Not because you dominate. Not because you impress. Not because you know how to control perception. But because there is no longer a split between who you are and how you stand. People may still disagree with you. They may still misunderstand you. They may still leave. But the atmosphere changes when a person is no longer bargaining with themselves. They feel harder to shake. Harder to confuse. Harder to pull out of center. Not because they are rigid, but because they are rooted. And rooted people do not beg. They do not beg to be chosen by those who do not see them. They do not beg to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding them. They do not beg for closeness at the cost of self-respect. They do not beg for peace by surrendering truth. They breathe. They observe. They choose carefully. They remain human, but no longer available for inner collapse every time the external world becomes uncomfortable. That is strength. Quiet strength. The kind that does not need to announce itself. The kind that can sit in a room and say very little, yet feel unmistakably present. The kind that lets you walk away without needing the last word. The kind that lets you love without losing form. The kind that lets you be generous without becoming depleted. The kind that lets you face life with a softer face and a stronger spine. And maybe that is the real lesson hidden inside this entire reflection. Respect is not stolen from you in one moment. It is slowly surrendered every time you act against your own deepest knowing. Every time you silence yourself to stay welcome. Every time you make your truth smaller so others do not have to confront theirs. Every time you treat inner discomfort as less important than outer approval. But the opposite is also true. Respect is rebuilt every time you return to yourself. Every time you choose clarity over performance. Every time you stay honest without becoming harsh. Every time you let another person have their reaction and still remain aligned. Every time you remember that peace was never supposed to come from managing everyone around you, but from governing what is within you. So let this be the shift. Not into pride. Not into distance for its own sake. Not into coldness disguised as wisdom. Let it be a shift into inner agreement. A quieter mind. A cleaner heart. A steadier voice. A life with less chasing, less explaining, less leaking, less fear. A life where your dignity is no longer up for discussion every time someone fails to understand you. And when you leave this reflection, remember this. You do not need to control every situation to reclaim your peace. You do not need to be admired by everyone to walk with dignity. You do not need to explain yourself endlessly to prove your worth. You do not need to keep abandoning yourself just because that habit once felt familiar. Sometimes the deepest change begins the moment you decide that your inner life is no longer a place where fear gets the final word. If this message touched something true in you, write in the comments, I choose self-respect. Not as a performance. Not as a slogan. But as a private promise to the part of you that has waited a long time to be chosen. And maybe the real power in life was never about controlling everything that happens around you, but learning, with patience and discipline, how to control the way you respond to each moment. That is where respect returns. That is where peace begins. And that is where a person finally becomes impossible to betray from within. So the next time life puts you in one of those moments, the moment where you feel the urge to over-explain, to soften your truth, to make yourself smaller just to keep someone else comfortable, do not rush. That is where the old habit usually wins. Not because you are weak, but because speed has always protected that pattern. The faster you react, the less clearly you see. The less clearly you see, the easier it becomes to return to the version of yourself that survives by abandoning itself. But wisdom often begins with one pause. One breath before the reply. One moment before the apology. 1 second before you start defending something that did not need defense. That pause is small, but it changes everything. Because inside that pause, you remember yourself. Inside that pause, you ask whether your next words are coming from truth or fear. Inside that pause, you stop being dragged by habit and start being guided by awareness. And awareness is where freedom begins. Most people do not lose themselves in dramatic moments. They lose themselves in repeated ones. In ordinary conversations. In subtle discomfort. In the everyday pressure to be easy, agreeable, harmless, endlessly understanding. That is how self-respect is worn down, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, through repetition. So the restoration of self-respect happens the same way. Quietly. Repeatedly. In the little moments where you choose not to betray your own center. You do not need to become a different person overnight. You do not need to sound colder. You do not need to force confidence. You do not need to perform power. What you need is honesty with discipline. A calmer loyalty to your own truth. A deeper refusal to keep treating your inner peace like something negotiable. That means some days the victory will look very simple. It will look like saying less. It will look like not sending the extra explanation. It will look like letting silence remain silence. It will look like not chasing a response. It will look like feeling guilt without obeying it. It will look like being misunderstood and still staying grounded. Those victories are invisible to most people. But they are not invisible to you. Your mind feels them. Your nervous system feels them. Your soul feels them. Each one becomes evidence that you are changing. Each one becomes proof that you are no longer willing to hand yourself away just to avoid temporary discomfort. And that matters, because a person becomes stable not when life becomes simple, but when they stop collapsing every time life becomes uncomfortable. That is the difference. A strong person is not someone who controls the room. It is someone who can remain inwardly steady even when the room is uncertain. A strong person is not someone who never feels hurt. It is someone who feels hurt without turning that pain into self-betrayal. A strong person is not someone who never cares what others think. It is someone who cares, but no longer obeys every outside reaction as if it were law. This is what the Stoics were always pointing toward. Not a life without emotion. Not a life without relationships. Not a life without disappointment. But a life in which the inner world is no longer ruled by everything outside of it. A life where dignity is protected from panic. A life where peace does not depend on everybody else behaving correctly. Because they will not. Some people will still test you. Some people will still misunderstand your silence. Some people will still resent your boundaries. Some people will still prefer the version of you that had no structure. Some people will still call your growth distance because they benefited from your lack of it. Let them. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. You cannot keep sacrificing your center to keep every relationship comfortable. You cannot keep reducing your truth so other people never have to confront their own expectations. You cannot keep carrying the emotional weight of every reaction around you and still wonder why you feel tired all the time. Some burdens were never yours. Some explanations were never necessary. Some connections only survived because you kept overfunctioning inside them. And once you understand that, life becomes quieter. Not empty. Not lonely. Quieter. The kind of quiet where you stop rehearsing conversations in your head. The kind of quiet where you no longer feel compelled to fix every tension immediately. The kind of quiet where another person's mood no longer takes over your nervous system. The kind of quiet where your own thoughts stop sounding like an argument and start sounding like a home. That is one of the most beautiful changes a person can experience. To become a home for yourself. To no longer feel internally exiled. To no longer feel like your worth must be renegotiated every day. To no longer feel like peace is something you purchase with self-erasure. And maybe that is what respect really is in the deepest sense. Not just how others see you, but how safely you live inside yourself. How honestly you stand with your own conscience. How consistently you refuse to turn against what you know is true. Because if a person is admired by everyone but divided within, what have they really gained? But if a person is not fully understood by the world and still remains internally aligned, there is something profoundly powerful in that. If this reflection has been helping you see yourself more clearly, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and stay with this kind of work. Some messages do not just inspire you for a moment, they slowly rebuild the way you live. And that rebuilding is sacred. It is sacred when you speak more carefully. It is sacred when you stop apologizing for existing clearly. It is sacred when you protect your mind from unnecessary chaos. It is sacred when you stop offering endless access to people who do not honor your spirit. It is sacred when you choose truth, not because it is easy, but because living falsely has become too heavy. So from this point on, let your life become a little more deliberate. Let your words become fewer and cleaner. Let your no become calmer and stronger. Let your yes become more honest. Let your peace become less available to random disturbance. Let your self-respect become something you practice, not something you merely hope to feel. Because hope alone is not enough. Awareness is not enough. Even insight is not enough. At some point, truth must become conduct. It must enter the body. It must shape how you answer, how you wait, how you leave, how you stay, how you respond when old patterns ask to be fed again. And they will ask. The old habit will return in subtle ways. It will say, explain more. It will say, make this easier. It will say, do not disappoint them. It will say, fix the tension quickly. It will say, shrink a little, just this once. And maybe the most important thing is that when that voice returns, you do not hate yourself for hearing it. You simply recognize it. You breathe. You remember. And you choose differently. Again and again. until the new choice becomes natural, until self-respect no longer feels like effort, until inner steadiness stops feeling unfamiliar, until peace becomes less of a rare moment and more of a way of being. That is how transformation really happens. Not in one dramatic breakthrough, but in quiet loyalty to truth. And when you live that way long enough, something settles inside you. You stop needing to prove your value so often. You stop needing to be seen correctly by everyone. You stop needing constant reassurance that you are allowed to take up space with dignity. You begin to understand, deeply and calmly, that your worth was never supposed to be placed in unstable hands. It was supposed to be guarded by you. So walk away from this message with that thought. Not everyone will understand your change. Not everyone will like your clarity. Not everyone will be comfortable when you stop abandoning yourself. But you will breathe differently. You will think more clearly. You will sleep more peacefully. You will carry yourself with less noise inside. And in the end, that may be the real victory. Not that you made the world treat you perfectly, but that you finally stopped treating yourself as negotiable. If this touched something real in you, write in the comments, "I stay true to myself." And remember, real power is not found in controlling people, outcomes, or opinions. Real power is found in mastering your response, protecting your inner world, and becoming someone who no longer needs to betray themselves in order to feel accepted.